Hi everyone, in this three-part tutorial series we've been creating a starlit night sky in Unity like this. In the first episode we focused on reading in the data from a binary file format from the Yale Brightstar catalogue. In the second we created the beautiful star objects with a shader, and in this third episode we're going to look at creating the constellation lines so they really pop out in the sky. Let's get started. Let's start with how we're going to draw the constellations. There are two things that we are doing. Firstly, we're colouring the stars in white, and secondly, we're drawing lines between them. So as before, we'll focus on Orion. We create ourselves a list of constellations which contains a pair of arrays. The first will be the catalogue number of the stars. The second will be the catalogue number of the stars which need to have lines between them. Here it is with all the stars for Orion coloured white. We've got the three stars that form the belt, which have catalogue numbers 1948, 1903 and 1852. We carry on in this manner until we have all the stars from the constellation. I used a variety of websites and images to find out which stars form the constellations, but it turns out some people include more stars than others, so if I've not represented them exactly as you would, then I'm sorry, and you can add more or less to suit yourself. The second part is the lines. Here I'm using the format that in my list I'll take the entries in pairs, and that'll form a line. Again, we use the catalogue number to know which stars to draw lines between. That's it for Orion. We can now repeat this process with some other constellations: Mansaros, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Leo Minor, Lynx, and Ursa Major. I stopped there, but you can carry on to your heart's content. So let's work out how we're going to toggle these on and off. In the update function, we're going to check for various key codes with getKeyDown. Here we're starting with alpha 0, which is 0. Then I'm going to use alpha 1 through alpha 9, so the number keys 0 to 9. Rather than having to do a large if-else structure, we can use the property that the key codes are all sequential in the ASCII table. That's how various keys are represented as numbers internally. So we can add a simple for loop around this, iterating over I. Then to access each key, we can just add I to our alpha 0. When one of these keys is pressed, we toggle constellation I. I here acts as our index, so we know which constellation to turn on or off. So in the toggle constellation function, we take that index. Firstly, we check if it's less than the number of constellations we have. I haven't implemented all 10. If it isn't, we just return without doing anything. No harm done. Then, if the constellation is visible, we want to remove it, else we create it. This constellation visible variable is a dictionary which we can define at the top, going from an int, the index, to a game object. This is so we can create all the objects underneath this game object and easily destroy them when we no longer need them. The contains key method allows us to check if we've set that yet, i.e. we've created it or not. Let's start with create constellation. We take our index and pull out the constellation from item 1, which contains the stars, and lines from item 2. To start with, we'll change all the stars in the constellation to white. So iterate over the catalogue numbers in the constellation with a for each loop. As the catalogue numbers are 1 up and our index to our star objects is 0 up, we subtract 1 from this. We then use getComponent to pull off the mesh renderer and set the material colour to white. Create a new game object, Constellation Holder. We'll use this to add the game objects for the lines. We parent this to the transform of the script, which remember from last episode is the camera holder. This means our lines will move with the stars as we move around. And we add this index to our constellation visible dictionary, passing in the constellation holder as the value. I'll pause there in this method for a moment and jump to the remove constellation function so we can test the star colour part on its own first. Remove constellation takes the index as before, and similarly we pull off the collection of stars in the constellation as item 1. Then, for each catalogue number in the constellation, we again use getComponent to get the mesh renderer. This time we set the material colour to the colour from our stars data array, resetting it back to the original. To remove the lines, we simply destroy the holder. Not that we've added anything to it yet, but this will destroy all the children. This is what we stored in our constellation visible dictionary. Finally, we remove the index entry from the dictionary, so when we check it to toggle next time, it won't be there. So let's jump into Unity now and just double check our toggle is working. You can see when I press the various number keys, some of the groups of stars are toggling to white and back to colours again. It's quite hard to spot unless you know the constellations, so we'll dive back into the code and finish that off. In our create constellation, we'll iterate over the lines array. Note, because we're going to process these in pairs, the increment is I plus equals 2. We're going to use line renderers to draw the lines. However, constellations aren't often a contiguous path. And furthermore, we're going to want to leave little gaps, which we'll see in a moment. So we'll create a line renderer for each pair of points, which means we need a game object for each line too. So we create a new game object called line, set its parent to our constellation holder. Remember, that means we can delete it by deleting the holder. And we use add component to add a line renderer to the new game object. Unfortunately, line renderers added at runtime don't have the material added by default. In this instance, I'm using the legacy shaders, particles, alpha blended pre-multiply. There are probably others that work, but beware, not all shaders work, because line renderers assign colours to the vertices so it can do the blending between points, and not all of the shaders support this. Now, it's important we tell the line renderer not to use world space, as we want these lines to move with our camera. The positions we want to draw between are simply the positions of the stars. In the line renderer, we set position count to 2 and set each position. Now if we look at this, it'll look like this. The lines go from the centre of each star. I think this looks a bit clunky, and how I always envision constellations is the lines end before the stars so we don't occlude them. We can do that, we just need to perturb the ends slightly along the line. First, we get a vector 3 dir, which will be the direction to move along the line. That's simply the normalization of the second position minus the first. We multiply this by 3 to get the desired gap. I found this value by trial and error. Then we simply, for the first position, add the direction on to move it along the line towards position 2, and for the second, we subtract it off to move back towards position 1. Now our constellation lines look like this. So much better. So let's jump back into Unity and look at what we've got now. As I look around, I'll add each of the constellations in. That's excellent. All the constellations are looking amazing. I've had a lot of fun making this tutorial series. I hope you found this tutorial useful in some way. As ever, the full code is on GitHub and is linked in the description below. If you have any requests for tutorials, let me know in the comments. See you next time.